Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise of Justice Movement podcast. My name is Zachary, and I am the founder and the host of the Rise of Justice Movement, the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I'll give a viewer discretion is advised due to the nature of the topics that we will be discussing. All right, so today I am joined by Alicia, who is with the ACLU of Washington, D.C. Alicia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Zachary. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's dive right in. So, let's do an introduction for yourself. Give us a background on who you are, what got you into this work that you're doing now, and just give us that backstory. And then we're going to dive in and talk about a number of different things, but it'll mainly be, talking about ICE in DC, National Guard in DC, but also why DC needs to be included in this like overall conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel like DC is very pushed to the side because it's not a part of the 50 states. It should be, let's be real, it needs to be the 51st state. But let's do a little bit of a backstory, and let's talk about who you are as a person, and then we'll kind of dive in and talk about what's happening in DC.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct about DC. We don't fit neatly into a lot of boxes. So we're a little bit on our lonesome and we're trying to change that and get more people invested in the well-being of the district, both for the residents of the district and as we'll get into later, for their own self-interest. But a little bit about me, I guess I was actually just talking to colleagues maybe last week about what got me into this work. And I think it really does go back to my upbringing. I was raised by a very strong feminist mother who really exemplified that for me growing up, and then got interested in politics and policy issues. When I was in high school, doing an internship with my congressman in my home district, then up in Connecticut. So I've really been doing issues like this for a long, long time. And the first for me was women's rights, and reproductive rights was really what drew me to civil rights issues more generally. Then that work led me to law school, which led me to my first career as a lawyer, which was doing child exploitation prosecution with the Department of Justice. But as we all know, there's flaws in our criminal legal system, and that led me to want to be doing different work. And I got into police oversight work, looking at the civil rights there and how law enforcement should be protecting the rights of everyone in the community, and really be a part of the community that they're serving, and what that would mean. And then spent a little time in Congress as well on the House Oversight Committee, and then came to the ACLU DC, which has really been amazing because we work on so many issues. I myself am a resident of the district, so the issues that we are fighting for are ones that I am personally invested in. And we work to make sure that the everybody is valued and recognized in our community, that everyone, because everyone deserves dignity, fairness, and an opportunity to thrive. So we're trying to build a district where people have the equal right to go about their lives without invasive, humiliating, or violent encounters with the criminal legal system, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, or disability. And we want to make sure that all of our systems are in place to make sure that we're building up safety from within communities, and not allowing government intervention to get in the way of what communities can do for themselves and how communities know what they need best. And really looking at the different ways that that emerges in the policies that come out of our government. And remembering that the government serves the people and not the other way around. So here in the district, it's a lot of these issues are rising in importance and in sort of speed with which we're seeing things change because of Trump's DC power grab. We're seeing this administration use DC as a testing ground for policies that expand their power, create fear, and undermine democracy here in DC. But they are policies that, in many ways, we see the administration wanting to expand across the country. So they're issues that really everybody should be aware of and looking to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like I said, DC is really left out of the big conversation, right? And you're absolutely right. It's a direct power grab. You're absolutely correct. And there's no
Yeah.
accountability, you know. And whenever I think back before Trump took office, I think about the ruling from the Supreme Court about, you know, presidential immunity.
Hmm.
And you think about this, and you mentioned about, you know, the criminal justice system. And I come from a survivor standpoint whenever I think of criminal justice,
Hmm.
right? And we see what's happening with the Jeffrey Epstein files right now, and the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency from the Department of Justice. Um, you know, and just thinking about that and seeing like what's happening right now, you know, let's dive in and see what is happening on the ground in DC. You know, from your angle and from your point of view, what do you see happening? You know, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you witnessing? And let's kind of dive into that a little bit and dissect it a bit.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the Trump administration really try to create fear, not just here in the district, but in the way they talk about the district and talk about what is going on here and creating a vision of what is happening in DC for those around the country that does not match what the people live here are seeing and experiencing. And I think a lot of this began, although it certainly had roots before it, but on August 11th of 2025, President Trump announced that he was federalizing DC's police department and deploying National Guard to the streets of DC. This was done under the auspices of a crime emergency, but this was a phony emergency. It was manufactured, it was cherry picking facts. The crime rate in DC is actually on a 3-year decline at the time that this crime emergency was announced. So it was not at all in relationship to reality. It was purely just a way for Trump to expand powers and test out the limits of home rule and what that would mean. So we saw that Trump's order to federalize the DC Police Department expired on September 10th, but the National Guard troops remain. They are still here on the streets of DC, and from all reporting, will remain here through the rest of 2026. This means that these National Guard members from states around the country are not living their lives in their homes. It is leaving their states without National Guard troops to respond to emergencies as they are intended to do if there are whether, natural disaster emergencies, anything like that that they normally would respond to, they are not available for that. And they are patrolling the streets of DC. We see them in our metro stations. We see them walking through our neighborhoods. And it creates a atmosphere of fear and apprehension. It creates a distrust, both in the government and in law enforcement generally, which can have repercussions that will last for years. And they're costing us, they're costing the government, they're costing our tax dollars so much money. I forget what the estimate was, but I think it was like 1.6 million a day or something crazy. And it just adds up and isn't really serving a purpose that is anything other than expanding the power grab that President Trump is doing in many ways, but here in DC in particular. We're also seeing this as being a testing ground for tactics that Trump would want to use around the country. For example, we did see that he also tried to send National Guard troops to Chicago last year as well. But because Illinois is a state, the elected officials, the governor, the mayor of Chicago, they were able to sue the Trump administration and prevent the National Guard from being deployed to their streets in the same way it has happened in DC. But here in DC, because we are a federal district, we operate under home rule. We do not have statehood. We do not have those same mechanisms to protect against the federal government taking these types of steps in our district, and how it's impacting those who live here. And it's twofold, because not only do we not have the mechanism to stop it, but we don't have a voice in making those decisions. We have a delegate in Congress, but she cannot vote on the floor. And we do not have any representation in the Senate when they're making decisions that affect our daily lives. And I think a really good example of this actually just happened last week. The Senate was debating a disapproval resolution of DC law, which I can get into separately. But Senator Rick Scott from Florida, in his floor speech, said, Congress is DC's legislative body. This means we have a constitutional responsibility to fight for those living here, just like any legislature should fight for the people living in their state. But the irony of that is that in any other state, the legislature is accountable to the people. They are elected by the people. These members of Congress, these senators, they're not elected by the residents of DC. We have no vote in there. We have no vote for who gets those offices. And to add insult to injury, many of those offices will not take meetings with people who are not their constituents. So DC residents are left with no one to voice their concerns to, even though Senator Rick Scott said they are paternalistically legislating for the district. So we're just seeing these attacks come in multiple ways and impacting various different aspects of our lives, and in ways that are just not helpful for the day-to-day lives of the real people who live in DC.
He has a lot of room to talk, and I'm not going to dive super deep into this because I try to stay as bipartisan as possible, and I know it's extremely difficult in certain aspects, but he has a lot of room to talk about anybody working for their constituents because, he works for his billionaire friends. He works for Donald Trump. He does not work for the people of Florida. We know that. And that can be said about a number of different people, like on both sides of the aisle. They're backed by these big corporate dollars and these big, super PACs and APAC. And it just keeps going down this whole like level of everything. But, I think it's the irony of all of it is so, well, ironic. Because it's like, you're, oh, God, we're all about small, or they claim that they're about small government, right?
Yes.
And what is so small about literally taking, I'm sure we have like, God, I'm getting tongue twisted on this because there's a lot that I want to say, but I'm trying to keep it I'm trying to keep it mild because there's a
Yeah.
lot that I can say here. Um, and I want to make sure I don't cross a boundary with ACLU, et cetera. I know ACLU is very unfiltered anyway, and I love that. I watch the national social media account, and it's just like it's so good.
You should
So
follow our
I
DC account too.
I did. We
Oh,
actually
great.
just followed just to kind of make sure we're keeping tabs and just watching and seeing what's happening. Speaking of which, in regards to like social media, okay, whenever you put up a post about like a call to action or contact your lawmakers, contact your senator, your XYZ, what are you seeing in regards to like social media, like in the comment sections? Like what are you all seeing? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
It does. I should be paying more attention to the comment section than I actively do. I do, obviously follow all of our social medias and am paying attention to
Mm-hmm.
that, but I don't often turn as much attention to the comment section. I think, um, for many people, particularly here in the district, there can be an element of frustration, and feeling
Mm-hmm.
like no matter what they may think or do, it doesn't matter because there's nobody to listen, or nobody to hear, I guess, what they
Mm-hmm.
have to say. And I think that's part of the problem that we are experiencing. When you mention the small government, DC does have the DC Council and the mayor who, they act in the interests of the residents of DC and are responsive to our needs and what the community is looking for, and they pass laws. But because of home rule and the way the district is set up, all of those laws go to Congress for a review period. And then Congress can block any of those laws. And that was what I mentioned. Rick Scott's statement last week was on a disapproval resolution. DC Council had passed a law to, this gets into some very complicated tax policy, which I am by no means an expert on. So this is a very superficial explanation. But the federal government tax code is often followed by the states unless the state chooses to decouple, meaning separate itself from the federal tax code and do something different. Um, this has always existed. This isn't new, but in Trump's big, beautiful bill, there were several tax provisions passed that states have not wanted to follow. So at least 8 states that I'm aware of passed laws in those states to decouple their tax code from the federal tax code. So this has precedent. DC did the same thing, and this was to increase revenue available to the district to spend. And one thing that they were going to use that money for was a child tax credit. This is something that had wide support in the DC community. It is something the ACLU DC advanced as a policy priority in our Building Safety Through Resources report, as a way to give families more money to enable them to be stable, safe, and secure. So it had wide support, and it would be funded through this decoupling. The Congress and then Senate, and then yesterday the president signed the disapproval resolution. There's still some legal limbo about what is actually happening with this, but it is the federal government paternalistically putting in their thoughts on what is best for the DC community. And that is totally the opposite of small government, the concepts of federalism that this country is built on. And that sort of process really can make people in the district feel like they have no voice. And even though they may have fought very hard to get this law passed, it can all be undone by people who have no accountability to the people of DC. So that's really frustrating as you know, those of us in the district do work to um, push forward policies that are beneficial to the residents of the district. So the DC Child Tax Credit was a really good example of that. And I will, I won't dive into the whole thing now, but I would love to chat with you a little more about policies we think would actually support communities here in the district, but obviously require funding. And if Congress ties our local elected leaders' hands on how they can come about that funding, it really stymies all these efforts and can make people feel disconnected from the government, from their communities, and the way that we're all supposed to be interconnected.
And you know what? Let's actually do dive into what would actually help DC. So,
Yeah.
they blamed like the surge of ICE, they blamed the surge of National Guard. You said it earlier, like this sense like emergency, like quote, and I say that literally in air quotes, like emergency,
Right.
right?
We
You
we
said it
call it
yourself.
a phony emergency.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And it's like it's a false flag, right?
Yeah,
And it's one
absolutely.
of those things that it's like you're just pulling things out of thin air to make yourself look good. Like you're doing this and you're doing that, and oh my God. Anyway, so let's dive in and talk about what would actually help DC residents be able to live their lives without having to literally watch every single corner.
Yeah,
Because based on the images that I've seen and videos that I've seen, they're literally like posted up literally everywhere. Like
yeah.
you turn around and you see this National Guardsmen with their rifles, and you can just see them like walking through, and like what the hell is that doing? It's literally terrorizing communities, especially the marginalized communities,
Oh,
like
absolutely.
trans people and our immigrant populations. And you see it, and it's this constant sense of fear. Who are you serving and protecting? You're not doing a damn thing. And we tried, Congress tried to censor, and not even Congress, this administration tried to censor veterans for saying you don't have to follow illegal orders. I mean, look what's happening with Senator Mark Kelly.
Yep.
right? And oh God, I'm
I
gonna
know
stop there
it goes into an avalanche of so many issues that get tied in.
because
But in
it just
terms
gets
of,
this. It's just trickled down, you
yeah,
know.
and in terms of making our communities safer, it's not more policing. So it's not sending National Guard onto the streets. It's not federalizing the DC police force. We know that what keeps communities safe is investing in solutions that address the root causes of public safety issues and have the ability to stop crime before it happens. Um, so to build communities that are safe and advance justice for all, we need to invest in reaching people with resources when they need them. So the ACLU of DC put out a report in November titled Building Safety Through Resources, A Better Path to Public Safety in DC. If you're interested, it's up on our website, which is acludc.org. You can get the whole thing there. But we went through several different areas of focus that we think our elected leaders should focus on to promote safety within the district. So we focused on supporting families, supporting our youth, and supporting reentry as the three pillars to this. And we looked at programs that existed already here in DC and could be expanded to serve more of the population. And we also looked at programs that existed in communities around the country that were really showing a high success rate and improving the lives of the communities that were able to take part in them. So, with looking at supporting families, child poverty is higher in DC than it is in the nation. In DC, it's 17.1% versus nationwide at 13.7. So this is clearly a concern here in the district. And then particularly looking at 36% of Black children in DC are living below the poverty line. So that is something that needs to be addressed because low income can put a family in a stressful situation when they are struggling to access nutritious meals, enriching learning environments, high quality childcare, all of those things. It can make it really difficult. And then that's compounded in DC by the high costs of childcare, where in DC, families pay over $23,000 per year for infant care. So that's a huge amount of money. So looking at ways to put money back into the pockets of families will enable them to be more secure and will set those children up for success. So we looked at child tax credit. Nationally, there was an increased child tax credit during the COVID pandemic, and it led to a 30% decline in the child poverty rates. So that's really strong success. And it alleviated, and at that time, it alleviated poverty in the district for 25,000 children. So that's a huge impact. So looking at that, we advocated for a DC child tax credit, and the DC Council, as I said, did pass that, although it was dependent on this additional income. Another program we looked at was child care subsidy programs. We looked at New Mexico as a guide on this because they have guaranteed free child care in New Mexico now for those making up to 400% of the federal poverty level. So that has been a hugely successful program in New Mexico. And it's only 3 years old, but already 27,000 children have benefited from it. And families have as much as $1,000 more dollars per month in their pockets for other expenses that come with raising a family. So that's clearly a program that has been successful and has actual dollars tied to it. And I think when we talk about bipartisan, I think New Mexico is also a state where we see people across the political spectrum living. So it really does show that when you actually are trying to do programs that are benefiting the people, it can cross divides in ideological party, whatever it might be. Then we were looking at youth. Too often, young people are offered critical services only when they have already become engaged with the criminal legal system. So after they've already been arrested, after they've already had some other interaction with law enforcement. But research shows that locking kids up actually undermines public safety and hurts kids in terms of their mental and physical health. And as well, it can be disruptive to educational opportunities and building a career. So looking at this fact, we wanted to look at programs that gave interventions to youth before they have any interaction with the criminal legal system, and hopefully keeping them from ever being involved in that. So research shows that the best way to prevent young people from engaging in risky behavior is to provide them support and services that address the root causes of the challenges they face. So programs that help them build leadership skills, help them have healthy relationships with trusted adults, help them get support for mental and behavioral issues, help them create a sense of belonging in their community, and provide training and opportunities for employment are all successful. So we looked at programs that already existed here in the district. There was a really successful program through our libraries, which is the Teen Council, which allows teens to have some leadership responsibilities. We have some summer youth employment programs that have shown to reduce crime and incarceration. So looking at programs like that, we also looked to programs across the country that were doing good things for the teens and youth in their community. Ohio has a program that allocates 32 million annually to the counties to support alternatives to incarceration and community-based programs for the youth. And that has led to a decrease of incarcerated youth from 2,500 to only 300 in Ohio. Um, and we also looked at here in the district, our Office of the Attorney General has a robust restorative justice program, which is an effective alternative to the criminal legal system, as it allows honest conversations between a person accused of a crime and the person harmed by the crime. And it provides them to see each other's perspective and is a teachable moment that is proven to reduce recidivism. So programs like that are really effective. And then our final pillar was supporting reentry. And this is, once people have been involved with the criminal legal system, it can be very difficult to get out of that cycle. What is an additional wrinkle for residents of DC is if you are convicted of a crime in DC, you are sentenced to a term of incarceration, you are sent to the federal prison system. So that means you are not necessarily staying in or close to the district. You can be sent anywhere around the country, really. So that provides an additional hurdle to people staying connected to their communities, to their family, to their friends, anything that might be a support system. So people who are to returning to communities after incarceration, they're always going to face significant challenges, but there's that additional hurdle for those coming back to DC. But and then that is obviously everything is made more difficult by the stigma of having a criminal record. So we look to programs in DC that have been effective. We have Free Minds Book Club, which sounds like it would just be literacy programming, and that is part of it, but they also provide a lot of wraparound services for those returning back to our communities. We also looked at programs from other states. And in 2019, Colorado created a community-based reentry cash fund to put money in the pockets of those who were reentering after incarceration to allow them to have something to help build a life. And in 2022, Maryland funded organizations to provide entrepreneurship programs to be part of reentry programs to allow those who are returning from incarceration to learn new skills, to build businesses and be contributing. So these are all really effective programs that do not involve locking people up. They involve providing support for people to be secure in their existence, to have money for food, for housing, clothing, all the basic needs that we have so that they can be part of their community and support each other and not involve as much over policing as we're seeing. And when we see the president made his announcement that there was a crime emergency in the district, the reaction there and his path towards fighting that was sending out more police, sending out the National Guard, which is just causing more fear and intimidation and is not actually enabling people to live better lives, which is what our goal really is.
Oh, so you mean that you want to see people not live in fear,
Yeah,
literally
that would be
every single
great.
day. of their life. And children across the country go to school and they may not come home from school because of the lack of security. Thinking about what happened in Uvalde, right? What happened in Parkland, what happened in Sandy Hook. Thinking about gun violence, and gun violence being the leading cause of death amongst our younger populations, right? So thinking about that, and then also thinking about foster care. You mentioned about a number of different things, and I'm really glad that you kind of dived into that. And I guess like my next question is what's next? So what is something that ACLU is currently work or ACLU of DC is currently working on, and how can people really uplift the work that you all are doing, other than like sharing social media content and etc. But what's next? What are you guys currently working on at this very moment?
I mean, we're always working on a million things at one time.
Yes,
So,
yes.
but I think one big thing is we are really trying to elevate the concerns about home rule, and what this limited compromise means for the residents of the district. And then we are also trying to raise attention both with Congress and the Senate, but with really everybody around the country that what is happening in DC is uh, testing ground for what this administration wants to do around the country. Um, we're seeing, Trump's unprecedented siege of DC streets with federal agents and military troops shows how dangerous it is for DC to continue to be denied statehood. And it shows how people's tax dollars from around the country are being spent on targeting the people of DC and probably on policies that they're not really in support of when particularly there are so many other issues that are affecting people's day-to-day lives. So what we are trying to do is just make everyone see how undemocratic this really is. Um, think about if Congress had the power to overturn or dictate local laws for people living in Idaho or Florida or any other state, just on a whim. People wouldn't feel safe and secure in their homes if that was the case. Um, so we're just trying to raise this issue for everyone, and when they know that it's anti-democratic for there to be people in this country who do not have the same rights as people who live 10 miles away. Um, that is not a democratic principle that, everyone has the right to vote except for these 700,000 people who live in DC. So really trying to drive that message home and also just looking at what the Trump administration is trying to do in the district, not just with the National Guard, but looking at the various laws that are being introduced in Congress to change our criminal legal system here in the district. There are laws that have been passed that would expand cash bail, would make certain crimes be a mandatory pretrial detention here in the district, which is actually unconstitutional as it violates the due process clause. And testing out those things through legislation in the district that you could see being changed to federal law across the country and what that would mean for everybody. So we're the canary in the coal mine, as we say, and everybody needs to be paying attention to the issues that are happening here, to the laws that are being proposed in Congress to impact the district, because not only will they may impact district residents first, and they may impact those who visit the district first, but it is on a path to affect everybody across the whole country.
Because it does, and it impacts literally every single one of us. And I think something that all of us need to come together is advocate for the DC statehood.
Mm,
Literally, I mean, it functions. Like
yeah,
it's just common sense. It literally
yeah.
is. But obviously, that's something that a lot of our elected officials obviously lack, and they make it very clear. And I know that there is a DC mayor election coming up,
Yes.
So I'm watching that. I just saw a couple candidates, kind of like raise their hands, like, yeah, I'm ready to go, including one that currently sits on the city council. I'm blanking on her name at the very moment, but that's somebody
We
that
have
I'm
two, we
definitely
have
watching. Yeah.
Yeah, we have several major elections coming up. Our Eleanor
Hmm.
Holmes Norton, who has been the DC delegate to the House of
Hmm.
Representatives for a long time, is retiring. So there's many people running for
Oh,
that seat. Yeah, it's a big deal. And
okay.
even though, as I said, that seat does not come with a vote on the floor, it is the
Hmm.
little voice that the people of DC can have in Congress. So
It's
it is still,
visibility.
it's right, it is still important. So there's actually a number of very consequential elections coming up here in the district. And we, in a nonpartisan way, encourage everyone to exercise their right to vote in DC. We do fortunately have every resident of DC who's registered to vote um, automatically gets a mail-in ballot sent to them. So you have that as an option to vote. The polling places are open, and you do not have to go to your own polling place in the district. You can go to any of them. So the DC does make it does keep it open for people to have many avenues to vote, and people should take advantage of that right to vote. In all of the elections that are coming up, we have our primaries in June, in advance of the general election, November 3rd. And the ACLU DC will be sending out questionnaires to all of the candidates who file to run. And we will be posting those answers on our website to our questions about issues that we care about, that our members care about, in an effort to make sure that people are making educated decisions when they decide who to vote for. And they can see what the candidates have to say about the issues before they vote.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm a big, firm believer in equal representation. I always have been, and I believe in empowering people to have that voice, and not just to have a voice, but also be able to be a part of those decisions. In DC, whatever Congress does, it affects DC,
Yeah.
right? And like you said, it affects literally all of us because that's the reason of federal government.
Yeah, and I
um,
think, as I said, it can be really easy to just throw up your hands and say, no one's listening to me, so
mhm,
why should I bother? But that's
mhm.
exactly why you need to bother. You need to make sure people are hearing you and listening to you, even if it means screaming louder or getting more people to scream with you. It's
Yeah.
so important that we make sure our voices are heard, even when people don't want to hear them.
And all it takes is one person to be that voice and make that change, and it leaves those rippling effects. And they hear them through the halls of Congress, they hear them on social media. And the other thing that, anybody out there who is listening, if you feel that your voice isn't being heard, one thing to always remember is every single email, every single phone call that you make to your representative legally has to be documented, and it goes down in, it gets jotted down and it goes on record, and oftentimes those emails and those phone calls, the voicemails also get heard on the House floor. I think that's something that a lot of people do not recognize is there are ways to continue making your voice heard. They have to see us, they have to hear us, which is why it's incredibly crucial. And people can call the congressional switchboard, which I do religiously, and just call representatives. Like it's like, okay, we're gonna call, my representative, Representative Sharice Davids in the Kansas Third Congressional District is my current congresswoman, but I also grew up in Missouri, so I had Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, and I also lived in Minnesota where I had oh god, I can't remember what her name was. She was the congresswoman. I can't remember what her name is. Um, but those conversations do matter, and that
Yes.
is something that I really want people to understand. Even oftentimes you talk to a staff member, but you can say, hey, I'm a constituent of this district, and here's, a policy that I think that my congressperson should be advocating for, that should be working towards. That goes on record.
Yeah.
Every email, every
And the
phone call
residents
goes on
of
record.
DC need everyone who lives in the other states to do that, to call the representatives and say, I care about DC. I need you as my elected member of Congress to care about
Hmm.
DC because they don't have
Hmm.
anyone to call. Um,
Yeah.
so it's doubly important to the residents of DC that those outside of DC take that time to make their voices heard and let people let their elected leaders know that it's not just the 700,000 plus residents of DC who care about DC autonomy, but that it's people around the country who believe in the ideals of democracy and what we stand for as a democracy, and that is that everybody's vote matters, everybody gets that representation. Um, and as you said, once you have that representation, having the ability and to use it to call up your elected leaders and let them know what you think because they work for you. You elected them and put them there, and they need to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I deeply appreciate this conversation because it's something that is oftentimes overlooked because we know how corporate and mainstream media is. Oftentimes these conversations are left out, right? And these are
Yeah,
conversations that we need to be having with those people that do not have a representative and doesn't have a voice
yeah,
in the current electorate and things like that. And like you said, you have a delegate, but it's a non-voting, and it's like the people of DC are not being represented, and those needs are not being met. And even if city council and the mayor comes together and passes something, it's still contingent on Congress approving or denying it, and it's so that is just wild to me
yeah.
because
It
it's
can be
leaving
really,
a whole like big ass community, and it
yeah.
literally is. How many people did you say currently live in DC?
We're over 700,000 residents.
So that's 700,000 people that don't have a voice in
Yeah, and that's
Congress.
more than two states.
Exactly.
So yeah,
Exactly. The numbers are there. The
the
people are
numbers are
there.
there.
It just makes sense. But again, some, Congress members have no sense literally at all because they work for these big corporations. They work for these big donors and the billionaires like Elon Musk, for example. And there's a lot more that we can mention, but that'll be a separate conversation. But is there anything else that you wanted people to take away from this conversation and understand about why it's incredibly crucial to continue advocating for DC and everything that we do? Whenever we think about abortion rights, whenever we think about criminal justice, whenever we think about, suicide prevention and mental health and LGBTQ and like we think about
Yeah.
all these issues going on, but is there anything else that you wanted to share that people need to be aware about with DC specifically?
I mean, I think it's just remembering DC is more than the federal government. I know not everybody in this country can make the trip to DC. For certain people, it's really far away. It can be expensive, all of those things. You may not be able to visit DC, but it is here for everybody. Everybody should be able to come and visit the district and feel safe and secure here, just like the residents should feel safe and secure here. And when we're up against systems that are fighting to make us fearful, that needs to be an important issue for everybody. We don't want to allow this false vision of what the district is that the Trump administration is pushing forward to become the accepted narrative because it's just not the truth. DC has normal people here. Yes, many do work for the federal government, but many don't. We've got normal businesses, arts, culture, all the things that are very separate from the government, and people just trying to live their lives here. People whose families have been living in the district for decades, if not hundreds of years, and are really rooted in this community and a part of it, and should be entitled to the full rights that our fellow Americans have across the country. So I think it's just really important to think about that DC is not just the federal government, it's so much more. And it's people who are just like people in your communities. And then DC is also important to protect for your own self-interest as wanting to come here and exercise your rights to protest or visit a museum or whatever it might be, being able to take advantage of coming to DC. It is here for everybody. And then also thinking about how we're the canary in the coal mine. So pay attention so that we can stop stuff before it happens here and prevent it from ever being spread across the whole country.
Absolutely. Alicia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Please take care of yourself. Please
Yes, you
keep in
too.
touch. And
Absolutely.
this will be one of many conversations. Keep us updated on how we can continue to amplify and how can people follow ACLU on or ACLU DC on social media. What's
Yeah,
the handles?
absolutely. Yeah. So go to acludc.org. You'll be able to find everything there. I am a true millennial, so mostly on Instagram as my preferred social media. And on Instagram, the handle is ACLU of DC. Um, but if you go to our website, you can find the links to all we're on all of them. We're on,
Speaking of
TikTok, we're
which,
on Twitter, we're on them all.
speaking of which, this will be the last thing, but I wanted to add this in
Yeah.
there because you mentioned it. I am too old to be Gen Z, and I am too young to be a millennial. August of '96 is a really weird time. I'll be 30 years old in August, but it's like that. It's like that weird cutoff.
You're
Like I said, I'm
caught in
too
the middle.
old. Yeah, and it's like so. I just use Zillennial.
There
It's
you
the
go.
perfect way to. It's the perfect way to express it.
And you know what?
But
We're all only as old as we feel. So do what works.
ooh, I feel like I'm in eight. I feel like I'm in my 80s. That's for
Well,
damn
there you
sure.
go.
But
So be an 80-year-old.
80-year-old millennial. How about that?
There you
All
go.
right. All right, my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. And please take care of yourself, okay?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Zachary.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.